In this video, we're going to look at the past tense in English. Before we start, let's just remind ourselves what tense means. Well, the tense of a verb is determined by when the activity takes place. Let's put up a timeline. So on this timeline, we have the past, the present, and the future. It makes sense, therefore, that there are three main tenses. The past tense for activities in the past, the present tense for activities that take place in the present, and the future tense for activities in the future. So tense is about when the activity takes place. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to describe the activities that take place on this part of the timeline. In other words, activities that took place before now. Okay, let's clear that and let's put our timeline to the top to give ourselves a bit more space. Okay, look at this arrow that's come down on the timeline. This represents an activity that started in the past and finished in the past. And we describe this by using the base form of the verb plus ed. For example, Martin painted the fence. Painted is made up of the base form of the verb to paint, without the word to, and then you add ed on the end. Let's look at another example. The Moscow State Circus performed in Boston last year. Performed is our verb in the past tense. It is made up of the base form of the verb to perform plus ed. Remember, the base form is the version you will find in the dictionary. And here is another example. I harvested what I planted. Here we have two verbs in the past tense. Harvested, from to harvest, and planted, from to plant. When you use this form of the past tense, it's called the simple past tense. And the simple past tense is used for a completed activity that started in the past and ended in the past. Now look at this word simple. This doesn't mean that it's easy. This is what is called the aspect. An aspect is part of tense. And there are four aspects. Let's have a look at them. So you have the simple aspect, which is the one that we've just covered. You have the continuous aspect, the perfect aspect, and the perfect continuous aspect. Aspect tells us whether the activity is ongoing or completed. This will make more sense as we do more of the aspects. The simple past tense is used for a completed activity that started in the past and ended in the past. What we have to say now is there are other ways of forming the simple past tense. The base form plus ed is for regular verbs, but as you no doubt know, there are lots of exceptions and there are lots of irregular verbs. And a lot of the irregular verbs are very common verbs. And there are some spelling rules to observe as well, so it's not always ed. Sometimes you have to double the last letter of the base form, sometimes you have to just add d. And some of them are irregular. There is more about regular verbs and irregular verbs on the website. The main purpose of this video is to look at the different aspects and how they are formed. Okay, let's move on. Next, the continuous aspect. So look at the timeline. We have an ongoing activity which has been followed by another activity. To describe this, you use was or were, depending on whether you're talking about something singular or plural, plus the present participle. Now, the present participle form of a verb is the version that ends ing, and we have more about that on the website. So let's look at an example. John was singing for an hour. Was singing. So you can see that that's an ongoing activity in the past. On this occasion, we don't have another activity. You do not always have to have one. Let's look at an example that does have another activity. I was painting the fence when the rain started. Was painting. So here you can see an ongoing activity when another activity started. Let's look at another example. They were sleeping when the alarm sounded. Were sleeping. That is an ongoing activity in the past. And then another activity happened. The alarm sounded. So look up again at the timeline. We have an ongoing activity and then another activity. Remember, like in the first example, there is not always a second activity. Okay, when you use this construction, you are using the past continuous tense. Remember, this bit here is the aspect. It tells us that the activity was ongoing. Okay, let's clear that. So, just as a reminder, the past continuous tense is used for ongoing activity in the past. Often, but not always, it is used to set the scene for another action. Okay, let's move on to the perfect aspect. Look at the timeline. We have an activity that started in the past and finished in the past that was then followed by another activity. To describe this situation, use had plus the past participle. Now, forming the past participle is difficult in English. Sometimes they end ed, sometimes they end d, sometimes t, sometimes n. It depends whether the verb is regular or irregular. And we have more about that on the website. Let's look at an example. The dog had eaten our dinner before we arrived home. Had eaten. That describes the first activity. It tells us that the activity is completed. And then we have the second activity, before we arrived home. The rain had stopped before the game started. Had stopped. That tells us the activity was completed before the second activity, the game started. She had called the police before she went to investigate. Had called. A completed activity in the past before another one. So, when you use this construction, you are using the past perfect tense. Remember, this is the aspect, and the perfect aspect is used for a completed activity. And very often, it's used to set the scene for another activity. And here we have those second activities in grey. Okay, let's summarize. The past perfect tense is used to emphasize that an action was completed before another took place. Next, let's do the perfect continuous aspect. Look at the timeline. We have an ongoing activity that ended at some point in the past. So this one is a mix of ongoing and completed. To describe this situation, use had been plus the present participle. Remember, that's the version that ends ing. Let's look at an example. I had been playing for 2 hours when the warden arrived. Had been playing. That's an ongoing activity that has now ended. We had been waiting for 3 days before the train arrived. Had been waiting. An ongoing activity that has now ended. And our third example, her publisher had been asking her for years before she wrote her book. Had been asking. An ongoing activity that has now ended. When you use this construction, you are using the past perfect continuous tense. Remember, this is the aspect, and it is used for an ongoing activity that has now ended. Now, look at these sentences. Here in grey, we have a second activity. That is very common when you use the past perfect continuous tense. What is also common is a phrase telling you how long the activity had been ongoing for. So in blue, we have how long the activity had been going for, and in grey, we have the second activity that then happened. This is a common structure for the past perfect continuous tense. Let's clear the examples. The past perfect continuous tense is used to show that an ongoing action in the past has ended. Okay, we have now covered all 4 aspects of the past tense: the simple, the continuous, the perfect, and the perfect continuous. It's worth just saying that these activities don't have to have been a long time in the past. They could have been 1 minute in the past, 1 second in the past. As long as they were before now, you should use the past tense. And it's also true for the future. It doesn't have to be a long time in the future. Okay, let's clear this. So we know we have 3 main tenses: the past tense, the present tense, and the future tense. And we now also know that there are 4 aspects. So let's bring those back. That must mean that in total there are 12 tenses. And there are 12 tenses. Let's take the verb to wash. So the one that we've covered today is this one. So the simple past tense, washed. The past continuous tense, was washing. The past perfect tense, had washed. The past perfect continuous tense, had been washing. And of course, these aspects exist in the present tense and the future tense. That is everything I want to say. This has been an overview of the past tense and the 4 different aspects. We have lessons and tests and videos for every aspect of every tense. That's all. Thanks for watching.